Hello, everyone. This is another episode of Fire Breathing Rob. Please like and subscribe to these videos. And if you're listening to us on another platform, we thank you for that. These are two people that I just met actually through email yesterday, but I'm happy we did because with this craziness that's going on in our world today, not just all around the world, but especially in our country, in all the states, we're completely paranoid, but we're paranoid for good reason because this disease is extremely scary. Renee Stiegel and Rhonda Aycock, and they did write a book, an ebook about stories, talking to many different people that have had the coronavirus. And they're going to talk to us about a lot of prevention stuff and also telling us a lot of these stories. And you can get these stories, and they'll talk about that toward the end of the interview, where you can get these stories. And I think it's important to read that as far as prevention in general. So Renee and Rhonda, thanks so much for coming on the program. Really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you so much for having us. We've been excited to do this.
Right. What made you want to tell these stories? Did you just have this idea? Or did you feel like the media wasn't really getting into these stories from all different individuals across the country?
Well, we started a self-quarantine, if you will, before our governor actually gave the order for stay at home. So, but during the stay at home time, Renee contacted me and she said, I've got a great idea. She said, everything in the news now, it was 100% in the news was COVID-19. Mm-hmm. And we're hearing conflicting stories, and then we're both Facebook aficionados. And she said, everything on Facebook is COVID. And I'm seeing people start to tell their stories in these forums and groups. And it's different than what we're hearing on the news. And everything on the news is so negative. And there's anxiety, and people need hope and encouragement. They need facts. They need to understand what we're facing. But we also, in the face of that, we need hope and encouragement. And she said, why don't we start a book and tell these people's stories? And the timing of it was perfect because what can you do at home? You're under stay-at-home orders. And so we decided we would write this book. And so that was how the idea came about, this brilliant one here.
Well, it was either write a book or clean out my closet during my free time. So, but seriously, it was heartbreaking seeing these people that had just tested positive. They were terrified, and other people were coming on and they're saying, I'm going through this too. And I said, we're not hearing where people are recovering and what these people did. And so I said, let's put it out there in one of these in this Facebook group and just say, we're wanting to talk to people that have come through this, that have survival stories, because we want people to know that they can get through this and share their stories. And it was amazing, the people that we had contact us. I mean, it was phenomenal, just wonderful people. And that's who we pulled together, and we started doing Zoom interviews. And this was her idea that we'll do, obviously we were in quarantine, so we had to do Zoom interviews, but it was beautiful because we got to see their faces. It wasn't just them sending us something in writing for their stories. We got to ask them questions, and the emotion that was there. We cried with people. We rejoiced with these people, just hearing their experience, their journey. And we were able to even take some of those Zoom video clips. And she had the brilliant idea of interjecting that into our ebook so that the reader now can click on links within each chapter and see the person telling their story and hearing the emotion. And it brings the book to life, literally.
We like to call it, you've got reality TV, and this is very innovative. We call it reality ebook. And we don't know of any others out there like that.
But being in North Carolina, I'm not sure where you are in the state, but in general, how do you feel like people are taking measures there? Is there a lot of precautionary measures there by the governor, Mr. Cooper, or even down the line by the mayors and if there's county commissioners? Is there a lot of precautionary things there, or is not so much?
Our governor is very cautious. He's one of the ones that are he's very cautious about going into they have the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. and we kind of get into phase 2 and things spike a little bit and he's pulling back. We're not yet going into the next phase. So yes, our governor is very, in fact, North Carolina now has a mask order so that anytime we go out, and even we're in Charlotte, North Carolina. I don't know if you're familiar with where Charlotte is. So we're a big hub of like the banking central of the United States. And so even in parks, they talk about when you go outside, you don't necessarily have to wear a mask. But in Mecklenburg County, where Charlotte is, we do have to, even at parks, we have to wear masks.
Right. And we talked about that before, Renee, when I was talking to you about riding my bike. And I was kind of scared to death about, what if somebody sneezes? What if somebody coughs in the air and you're just rolling right through and you just get contaminated right there? So let me ask you this, Renee or Rhonda, whichever one of you guys want to answer this. Speaking about that, as far as the parks go, and in the mask ordinance in general, we, in Florida, and we talked about this before the interview, there's been some pushback on people wanting to wear masks. And we see that a lot in the country in general, too. What are you seeing? What are you guys seeing in North Carolina? Is there a lot of pushback on the mask? Are most people abiding to the ordinance or no?
Well, I don't go out very often. We curb that as much as possible. So my husband and I were avid we're foodies. And so we would go out to restaurants more often than we would eat at home. And so now that restaurants, I would still say only 25% of restaurants are even open for dine-in now. So we go out maybe now once a week to a restaurant, and I go to the grocery store. I use Instacart most of the time, but when I do go to Walmart or the grocery store, it might be once a week. But I notice probably 90% of the folks in there are wearing masks, at least 90%.
That's great.
So people are observing it. Now, on Facebook, you'll see people protesting it, and you hear and see all kinds of things. But in general, when I go out, what I'm observing with my eyes is that most people are wearing the masks.
Speaking about the stories, what did you, how did you get these people to tell the stories? Did they just find you? I know you said a lot on Facebook, but how did you get to these people, and how did you know kind of what was the best story to tell? Because I'm sure a lot of people, gave you a lot of good stories, a lot of different stories, but how did you kind of filter them out, and how did you find people?
Well, like Renee said, we basically just put a plea out on some of these Facebook groups. There's COVID survivors and various groups, and told them what we were doing, that we were writing a book if anyone wanted to share their story, but the goal was to hear their recovery story, to hear how they dealt with it, what their symptoms were, but we wanted words of encouragement to be the prevailing thought. Even though when you read the chapters, there's sorrow, there's heartbreak, there's a lot of trauma. But if you're in the middle of the disease or you've just gotten a diagnosis, you need to know the truth, but you also need to know how these people survived and how they got to the other side. And these people want to tell their story because they went through so much emotionally, physically, spiritually. And all of these folks they're different, but they're so genuine. And we knew, within the first 15 minutes of each interview, that these folks were special, and they're wanting to tell their story because they want to help others. There's no gain for them at all.
One thing that was really interesting, and we kind of laughed about it, was one of the person, when I was looking through, I was mesmerized when I was looking through this COVID-19 survivor corps, their group, their posts that people were making. The lady that started that, she said when she was first diagnosed positive with COVID, she said out of the blue, she said she doesn't know this man, but Joseph Gottiscali, who was Vito on The Sopranos, brought her a meal. And she said it just blew her away. And so I was so intrigued by that I looked him up. I went to his Facebook and just was reading. Every day he was going out wearing his mask and going to restaurants. He had a profit that he, what am I looking for? The project that he had started where he was raising money to support local restaurants. So he was taking the money, going to these restaurants that were losing money by being closed, ordering all this food, and then taking it to hospitals, nursing homes, police stations, post offices, fire departments, and feeding the frontline heroes. And I said, he's not basically, he hasn't had COVID, but he is a hero out there doing what he's doing. I said, I really want to incorporate him into our book. And so I found a way I actually emailed him, and I thought, I don't know if he'll ever respond, So I'm sitting there just contacting people, doing stuff. And I sent the email. 5 minutes later, my cell phone rings, and it was an odd area code. And I thought, it's got to be spam, but I thought I'll just answer it. And I said, hello. He goes, hey, this is Joey. I'm like, who? This is Joey. I said, got a Scully? And he said, yes. I said, I just literally emailed you 5 minutes ago. 5 minutes ago. And I said, he says, well, tell me what you're doing. And so we kind of talked, and he said, I said, would you be willing to be interviewed? He goes, yeah, let's do it right now. And of course, I'm doing a horrible with my North Carolina accent and New York accent. And he said, let's do it right now. And I said, but my sister's not here, and she will kill me if I talk to you without her. And he says, well, can you get her on the phone? And I said, well, I can try. I said, let me call you back. He says, well, I'll hold. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to be able to get her on the phone. This is the one time she's not going to answer my call. And so I said, okay, hold on. I'm going to try to do a 3-way call. He goes, yeah, my first 3-way. Yeah, it's okay. And I'm like, oh jeez. And so I call her, and it's just ringing and ringing. And finally she answers, and I said, I've got Vito from the Soprano on the other line. Joseph got us calling. He wants us to interview him. And she's like, what? And so anyway, she says, just take a breath. And so I told her what was going on. And his story, we actually got to interview him. His story is so amazing and what he's doing. And we decided that that's going to be one of the charities that proceeds are going to raise money toward him. So that's just one of the great ways that we just got some people in the book. So
if you could just share one other story that was really emotional or special to you.
And we can share some highlights from several, because every story has just its moment in it that will take your breath away. One in particular that I'll tell you about is Brett and Amber James. They're a married couple. So to set it up, she's in the hospital with COVID, and she's 32 weeks pregnant. He's at home. He's at home with COVID, and he is taking care of his 4-year-old son and their uncle who lives in the house, who is also COVID positive. So all of this is going on. He gets a phone call from the doctor, and the doctor tells Brett, your wife and your baby are crashing.
And she's on a ventilator.
She's on a ventilator. She doesn't know what's going on. And so the doctor says, they're both crashing. We have 2 choices. We can do nothing, and there's sure death for both of them. Or we can take the baby and save the baby's life and then continue trying to save Amber's life. He said, however, she could bleed out, and we have to have your permission to, first of all, do the C-section, and second of all, to do blood transfusions. And Brett said, well, we're Jehovah's Witnesses. We can't do blood transfusions. And the doctor said, if you don't do it, she may die. But if you don't let us take the baby, they will both die. So he's at home with COVID, facing his own demons with the disease, taking care of the child, taking care of the sick uncle, and he's got to make a decision right then, right there. And so then while he's waiting, he gives the doctor's orders. He's waiting for 2 hours to hear if the baby's alive and if his wife's alive. And telling the story is emotional even right now. Yeah. And I don't want to give anything more away than that in that story, but
so much more happens in that story. But and then there's Colleen, who she worked for the Army. She worked on an Army base, and so when she hears the word lockdown, and she's intubated, she's got a ventilator, and she thinks from we hear about that people have hallucinations and all this, and you don't hear about this, the whole ventilating thing, everything that happens when you're on a ventilator. But she's heard the word lockdown, and she immediately thought there was a shooter in the hospital. Oh, God. And so she thought that the nurses and the doctors were coming to kill her. And she said she had this hallucination of this man standing there and the doctor saying her name, Colleen Holloway, date of death, March 20th, 2020. And she said, not today. And she said she ripped the ventilator out of her throat completely. And that whole story of what transpired after, I mean, there's just so many moments like that. And so she basically extubated herself.
Self-extubated. Yeah.
Wow.
The doctor actually said she saved her life by doing that because she wasn't getting any better on the ventilator. And it wasn't until then that she was able to breathe that her oxygen levels started coming back up.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, her body fought to live at that point because, you know, when you're on the ventilator, a lot of people don't understand, and that's what one of these other stories told. People think you go on a ventilator, it gets you all healed up or you die, but it gets you all healed up, and then they take out the tube and extubate you, and then you live, and you get up and you walk out and you go home, and that's not the way it is at all. They extubate you. You have to learn how to feed yourself again. You have to learn how to walk again. Every bit of that you knew how to do is gone. You have to be taught how to do it all again. And there's weeks and weeks of occupational and physical therapy. And the mental part of it, people don't talk about. Severe hallucinations from this disease, not only on the ventilator, but the disease itself. And for instance, one of the gentlemen who was on a ventilator, was it 8 days? Jim's like?
Yeah.
Jim was on a ventilator for 8 days. And you're all alone. Even the doctors and nurses only come in like once a day to check on you. And sometimes more than that, I guess, if you're on the ventilator. But no family is allowed to be in there. You're totally alone. And he thought his wife left him. And during the interview, he started crying. And he said, I thought I was going to hell. And I thought that everybody had abandoned me. My wife, I thought she'd moved on and was living with another man. And he said, I started asking myself, what did I do wrong? Why did this happen to me? It's heartbreaking.
And he said he couldn't determine what was reality and what was not. He said, I thought I remembered having an argument with the nurse and pulling out all of my tubes, even his catheter. He said, and I didn't know if that was real or not. He said, come to find out. He said, it was real. That really did happen. And that at that point, they had to soft time to restrain him to the hospital bed.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. That's really powerful stuff.
Yeah.
But wow. I definitely want to read some of these stories because that's something that you don't hear on the news. And I'm a news junkie too, also, Rhonda, and I don't hear any of those stories on the news. And you know, people.
Some of them likened the disease to feeling like an evil presence was coursing through their veins. And some of them likened it to poison, how it might feel if you had been poisoned. And they said you actually feel it in your body. And you know, that's not something we hear.
And they also, something we don't hear is that we heard a lot of them, they told us that it attacks weak parts of your body. For example, one of the ladies had broken her ankle, and she said she was almost completely healed from her ankle, but the pain then was so severe when she got COVID, it attacks your weak points.
Mm-hmm. And that's why, you know, the whole herd immunity thing that we talked about is, how do you know, you can put on this bravado and go out and say, I'm going to be the one, I'm going to get the antibodies and I'm going to fight it off and the immunity, but you don't know how that disease is going to attack you. You don't know the weak parts of your body, even anxiety. A couple of the girls that we interviewed had some issues with depression and anxiety before it hit them. That just was exacerbated then after they got COVID. And it also kept them from getting a COVID test early, because their doctor would say, well, you suffer from anxiety, so you really don't have COVID. It's this anxiety is making you think you do. And so then eventually they got a test and they were positive. Mm-hmm. And some of them had to lie to get the test. This was another thing that was so amazing. Initially, when these folks were going in, we were being told the 3 symptoms were fever, cough, and shortness of breath. Those were the 3. And if you only had 2 of them, you couldn't get a test. And so a couple of our folks said, they told them, I've been running a fever of 102, even though they hadn't been, because they knew they had the disease. And the only way they could get a test was to lie and to say they'd have fever. And so their test came back positive. And so this is a case, a lot of people were telling us, you have to be your own advocate. You've got to fight. You have to advocate for yourself, because in a lot of these cases, you don't have anybody else. Especially if you get quarantined, you get taken into the hospital, your family members that advocate for you, they're gone. They can't come in with you. And so they have to know your wishes. They have to be able to be strong, but you have to advocate for yourself.
Okay. Well, have you heard from anybody that has had it when they go back out about gloves? Because there used to be a big thing about wearing gloves. Do people worry about that?
We haven't really talked to the people we interviewed specifically about gloves.
Okay.
Personally, I know when I go pump gas, I'm going to wear a glove.
Right.
That kind of thing. And of course, if you have gloves on, you're not going to be able to, touch your face. Of course, if you're wearing a mask, that also helps. Even if a mask, getting back to the mask, if a mask just prevents you from touching your face, there's a plus right there. But as far as gloves, I personally haven't talked to anybody. I use them. I'm real careful about cross-contamination, because I have heard that's a huge thing. You don't want to handle, things in your purse with your gloves on after you've handled it, that kind of thing. So, you have to be real careful. That's the thing, is you constantly have to be on guard and thinking about everything that you do. And so going to the store is just a whole process of, okay, did I touch my keys? What hand am I using my credit card? How am I punching in the numbers of the keypad? It's just so much.
Cleaning your credit card before you put it back in your wallet.
Using hand sanitizer, cleaning it before I put it back in my wallet. So, I would say if you are good about wearing gloves and you're not cross-contaminating, then by all means, then do it. But you just really have to think about every step.
I will say this. We're the two safest people to be around because of our hand sanitizer in one hand and something else in the other. So if you go shopping with anybody, it would be us.
Okay. Okay. And I just have a couple more questions with the stories. Did you interview anybody that had been in or had family, I guess, in a nursing home or anything? Because we hear a lot of that. That's a big, big issue right now as far as nursing homes getting contaminated.
Yes, here's a fascinating story. Okay. We talked with the former chief of police of New York City, Joe Esposito. Wow. His 96-year-old mother is in a nursing home, and she got COVID. He was taking care of his wife, Chris. We interviewed both Christine and Joe. And Joe thought Christine was going to die. He would not self-isolate her. He would not put her in isolation. He stayed with her, but he said she's not going to a hospital. She's not going on a ventilator. He literally nursed her from the door of death to life. And then found out that his 96-year-old mom in a nursing home had it. And he told the folks there, get her on hydroxychloroquine. And they said, she's 96. It'll
kill her.
It'll kill her. And he said, look, what choice do we have? She's going to die of COVID if we don't. So they put her on it. In 2 days, her symptoms were gone. And she's doing wonderfully well. She did much better than Joe's wife. Actually. But, we had, in the folks that we interviewed, several of them took it. Several of them felt like it helped them. Mm-hmm. Some felt like it didn't help them. So, I don't know if it's...
it probably depends on their personal health history.
And the stage in which they were at the disease when they took it. Because it does supposedly work better if you take it earlier.
I know that the former NFL player, Mark Campbell, they gave it to him. He said he had been sick in his basement for days, a couple of weeks or so, and then he thought he was going to get better, but he said he couldn't get rid of the fever. He just couldn't shake the fever. And then he started having where he couldn't breathe. And he said it was like noon, and he was sitting straight up, and he said, I wasn't laying down, or he said I was sitting straight up and couldn't breathe, and I knew then I had to go to the hospital. So long story short, he did end up in the hospital, but his coworker and former player, Troy Evans, they have a business together now. He called, or he either called him or texted him and said, make sure they get you on this malaria drug. This was when they just first started talking about it back in March. And he said, I don't even know what that is. He said, just ask them about it. So the nurse came in and he said, Troy, my friend told me that to ask about the malaria drug. And she says, we already have you prescribed for it. You're going to be starting on it within 24 hours. And she named it. It was starting with the P. I can't remember what it was, but it was the generic name brand. And so, but he said that he felt like he was out of the hospital in 5 days. And he said he felt like that really helped him.
What advice would you give to people that are watching this?
Yeah, one thing that a lot of them had, we asked that question at the end of every interview, by the way. We asked them, what are your words of encouragement? What would you tell people? And there was a general theme, and then there were different things. One general thing was, you know your body. You know what you feel like on a day-to-day basis. So pay attention to changes and trust your gut, trust your inner instincts. Be your own advocate. Do whatever it takes. If you feel like you need to get tested, do whatever it takes. Don't stop with a no. Don't take a no from someone who's not authorized to give you a yes. Keep going. Keep pushing.
Stay away from the news.
Yes.
They said that the anxiety from that, one of the ladies said that she was on day 14 and she thought, okay, I feel good, I'm getting through this. And she turned on the news and they talked about a couple, husband and wife, that had died 6 hours in between each other, and they were on their 15th day. She said, so then I was back to square one thinking, I could die tomorrow. So they said, don't watch the news. It will give you anxiety and stress. Just focus on getting better.
And rely on people that you love. Let them help you. Let them take care of you. Another thing was about self-isolation. If you get the positive result, close up in your bedroom. Don't come out. Let your loved ones bring you food, put it at the door on paper plates so that you're not reinfecting them with dishes. That was real important, the self-isolation.
We definitely want to let people know that the net proceeds are going to charities that we really think are doing a fabulous job. America's Food Fund, and they feed the most vulnerable people in COVID-19 that are needing meals. And also Joseph Gonzalez Vito from The Sopranos that I mentioned earlier, helping the frontline heroes in New York. And we really feel that's important for people to know that as they're getting this book and they're getting valuable information, they are also helping those causes.
Yeah.
And where can they get the book?
Amazon.com is where they can get the book on Kindle.
Okay.
And it's free to Kindle Unlimited members. And it's $5.75 for people who are not Kindle Unlimited members. And it's COVID-19 Miracle Survivors.
All right, COVID-19 Miracle Survivors. Definitely go on Amazon and check that out.